My contract said 3 days. Walk the station, run the structural survey, certify it dead, sign the form that lets them burn it down on schedule. I have done this job 11 times. I have never once needed a 4th day. Greenhold Array had been drifting empty for 31 years. A tired ring of agricultural decking built by a sponsor consortium that didn't exist anymore. Abandoned when the soil program failed and the money went wherever money goes. The decommission office sends people like me ahead of the burn crews because insurance requires a human signature on the words structurally inert before anyone is allowed to point a deorbit charge at something this old. Most of the time the words are true. I check anyway. That's the job. I brought 2 techs, Foster and Amory, and the usual kit. Corers, stress gauges, a thermal rig, the handheld scanner I've carried since before I did inspection work. Back when I did something closer to rescue triage, and learned to read instrument noise the hard way. Old habits don't leave you just because the job changed under them. The station file gave me the basics. Greenhold Array had been built as an experimental closed-loop agricultural ring, decking stacked in concentric tiers around a central seed vault, soil beds threaded through with an engineered substrate meant to fix nutrients faster than raw regolith ever could. The program failed for reasons the file didn't bother explaining. Crop yields below projection, funding pulled, sponsor consortium dissolved into 3 smaller firms that all denied the liability. Standard story. I've certified the graves of a dozen ventures like it. The first thing I noticed, walking the central corridor, was that the walls were warm. Not machine warm. Warm the way a greenhouse is warm. Low and even, with a faint bioluminescent shimmer running through the panel seams like something out of an old hydroponics brochure. Residual algae bloom, I told myself. The kind that outlives its growers by decades in a sealed, humid hull. I logged it as ambient biological residue and moved on. That classification exists for a reason. I've seen it 100 times. Amory noticed the smell before anything else, not decay, which is what 31-year-old derelicts usually smell like, but something closer to wet soil after rain, threaded all through the recycled air. Foster joked that the life support filters must still be running on the original cultures. I wrote that down too, filed under things to verify, and didn't think hard about it until I had to. Foster found the pattern on day 2. He was coring a wall section near what used to be the seed vaults, routine sampling for the structural report. And when his bit went half an inch into the laminate, the shimmer in the panel didn't fade. It pulsed. 3 short, 1 long. Paused. 3 short, 1 long again. I told him to stop before I understood why I was telling him to stop. It took me a full minute standing there with my hand still raised before I placed it. That was a stress fault signature. The kind hull sensors are built to throw when a structure is under sustained mechanical load it can't sustain forever. I'd been trained to read that pattern as an alarm. I had just never seen one repeat, patient and unhurried, for what the secondary timestamp in the panel's own embedded log told me was 31 years. It took me the rest of that day and most of the night to understand what I was actually looking at, and I want to say plainly that I did not get there by being clever. I got there by refusing to file the easy report. The walls of Greenhold Array were not panels with algae growing on them. They were a single living lattice, a fungal colonial organism the original sponsor had seeded decades ago as a soil and structure symbiont, something meant to knit the station's agricultural decks together and process waste into nutrient stock. When the program failed and the funding consortium pulled out, nobody decommissioned the organism. Nobody could have. By then, it had grown through every panel seam in the ring. They just left, and it kept doing the only thing it had ever been built to do, which was hold the structure together and report on its own condition through the same stress sensors every station uses to flag a cracked support beam. For 31 years it had been doing exactly that, reporting, 3 short, 1 long, on every structural channel anyone bothered to leave open, because nobody had ever written a protocol that asked whether the thing making the noise might be alive. Every survey that passed through, including 2 before mine, filed it as ambient interference and moved on. I would have too, if Foster's corer hadn't put a wound in something that answered back. I called it the Corvethi Mycora Communion once I'd built enough of a vocabulary with it to ask. Not a name in the way I understand names. More a description it grew into the wall in spore light when I ran my scanner's translation routine against the pulse pattern long enough for it to notice I was listening on purpose. The deepest, oldest growths, what I came to think of as its memory groves, dense, knotted masses near the original seed vaults that held the colony's accumulated pattern memory the way our archives hold a library, were dying back. Nutrient starvation, 3 decades running on whatever the failed irrigation lines still leaked. 2 of the oldest groves would be gone within 6 weeks regardless of anything I did. The whole organism would be gone in 9 when the demolition charges went off on schedule. I am not authorized to rescue anything. My signature condemns or it clears. That's the entire shape of my authority. So I used the only tool I had. I wrote the inspection report straight. Structure load-bearing capacity compromised by embedded biological matter. Structure reclassified biologically active, inhabited. Demolition certification withheld pending review. True in every word. And under decommission code, a reclassification like that halts a scheduled burn automatically. No committee required. Nobody has to agree the colony deserves saving. They just have to agree the form is correctly filled out. That bought weeks, not help. So I spent the weeks myself. I called Priya, who does hydroponic systems repair, and owed me a favor going back to a station fire neither of us talks about, and I rerouted a supply transfer that was supposed to deliver irrigation parts to a colony 3 sectors over and was, conveniently, running half empty anyway. Foster and Amory stayed on past their contract without being asked twice. We worked off the original station schematics, which still showed the irrigation trunk lines running behind every deck before the program failed, the same channels, it turned out, that the communion had grown itself into and was now using as its own circulatory system. Priya rebuilt an injection manifold out of fittings never designed for the load, scavenged from 3 different inspection kits and 1 spare parts crate nobody back at the office would miss for months. Foster cut access ports by hand into deck panels we'd have condemned a week earlier, working slow and careful, checking with the scanner after every cut to make sure he wasn't opening a wound instead of a doorway. Amory ran the nutrient mix, calcium and trace minerals first, mineral-poor soil being the likeliest cause of the dieback, then iron compound once the response pattern confirmed we'd guessed right. We ran the line for 11 days, sleeping in shifts in a station that 31 years of paperwork had insisted was empty. On the 11th day, the oldest memory grove, the one nearest the original seed vault, put out a pattern I hadn't taught it and hadn't seen before. Slower than its distress signal, deliberate, growing itself letter by letter in spore light across 3 meters of wall, in a shape that took the translation routine most of an hour to untangle into something close to a sentence. It wasn't gratitude exactly, not in any word I have. Closer to a recognition that something it had stopped expecting had happened. I don't have a box on the form for that, so I didn't try to translate it into one. I copied the pattern itself into the report, image and all, and let it stand as its own evidence. The reclassification went through 12 days later, not because anyone above me was moved by a wall full of light, but because the paperwork was sound, and nobody wanted to be the signature that overruled a structural safety hold. Greenhold Array is still in orbit. It is on a maintenance rotation now instead of a demolition schedule, and I am the inspector of record, which means I go back every few months with whatever nutrient stock I can justify on a supply manifest, and the grove nearest the vault has started growing the pattern again whenever I come through the corridor. Not the distress signal this time. Something shorter. I never set out to save anything. I went to certify a dead building so it could be lawfully destroyed, and I found something that had spent 31 years reporting its own slow dying through the only channel it had, on a frequency built for steel, and never once meant for it to be heard. The form I filed was routine. I want that on the record too, because I think it matters. Nothing about what happened needed to be extraordinary to work. It needed someone to read the noise as a voice, and then to do the unglamorous, paper-bound work of making that reading stick. Before the inspection, nobody was listening. After it, somebody was. That's the whole of what I did, and it was enough.